Hi everyone, my name is Mackenzie Howren, and my research question is how can physical activity affect college students' stress levels? My inclusion or exclusion criteria is the articles need to address the correlation between stress and physical activity, specifically in college students. They can talk about factors that college students face or ways to help increase the amount of physical activity that college students partake in. So essentially either risk factors or preventative strategies that we can try and implement. My first article that I am going to talk about is an examination of stress in college students over the course of a semester. So this article is important to my research because it does a good job of explaining risk factors that college students face, and it explains that it's very common for students to have an increase in their stress levels when they start college because there are so many more stressors that we have to take on when we start college. So it makes sense that we are definitely more stressed. But it then goes in to talk about the effect that physical activity can have on our stress levels. And they say that increasing your physical activity will help decrease your stress levels, or they explain that it will help you be more prepared to cope with it as compared to as before. My next article is exploring the relationships of physical activity, emotional intelligence, and mental health among college students. This article is important because it gives a lot of facts about student stress and their exercise levels. So it explains that only 50% of college students meet the recommended amount of physical activity that they're supposed to meet a week, in which they give the recommendations right in here. But it explains that we need to intervene right now because if we continue to let this go on, more and more people will have complications when they get older. But after they explain their study, their results show that there's a direct correlation between physical activity and stress levels or overall mental health. And it just means that if you increase the amount of physical activity you engage in, the better mental health you will have, which also means the less stress you'll have. And then my next article, it really kind of tags along with the article that I just talked about because I'll write through here. It explains that the decisions that we make right now reflect how we will live our life later on. So the decisions that we make have a big impact on what our life will be like when we're older. So for example, if students continue to be physically inactive, they put themselves at a higher risk for things like obesity, chronic disease, and things like that. And so that's why this issue is so prevalent, because if we can intervene now, we can prevent a lot of people from having complications later on. My next article is one of the articles that I may or may not use. It has a lot of good information, but the problem is that it focuses specifically on academic success, as you can see right here. So it talks a little bit about stress because obviously stress comes along with academic success, but not as much as I would have hoped. But it does address how the physical activity can help with academic success, but I'm trying to focus more on just stress. My next article is tempering the decline in college students' physical activity. And this one focuses on ways to change or help the issue, which I think is very helpful because obviously it's important to acknowledge that the students' physical inactivity is a problem, but it doesn't do anything if we can't come up with ways to help them change. So all throughout here, it explains exactly that. And then in their study, they tried a bunch of different strategies of ways that we can intervene in college students' lives, and it explains which ones were the best and which ones were okay. And so I think that this will really be helpful in my paper when talking about preventative strategies. In my next article, this one is very interesting because it compares 31 different journal articles together and the studies that they conducted. And it compares the data that they had, that they got from these other articles. So they just have a simple graph or table, I should say, about all of the different studies that they had. So it's a really easy way for me to compare a bunch of different data in just one article, which is very helpful. My next article talks about an online intervention program, which is interesting because when you think about physical activity, you don't think about people learning about it through the internet. But this study acknowledged that technology is becoming more and more prevalent in our society. And so they thought they could try an intervention program through the internet and see if it helped college students. And all throughout here in their results, they explained that it actually did help because most students, I should say, want to engage in more physical activity, but some of them don't know how to. They know that they have a lot of resources on campus and it should be easy for them, but there's a lot of stigmas and a lot of misconceptions that students have that play a big role in why they don't partake. So this specific strategy helps get rid of some of those nerves that some students face. My next article talks about motivation. So obviously it's important to explain to students why this is such a big issue, but our next step is to motivate them to make a change. Because while it is important to educate them, if they're not motivated to change, then it doesn't even matter. So their studies went through and they tried a bunch of different motivation strategies. And they also focused on different types of physical activity. So right here, it explains that they wanted to make it more well known that you can engage in physical activity, whether it's through sports, group fitness, individual exercises like running or cycling or anything like that. It doesn't have to be a super intense workout that not a lot of people like doing. It can be like a fun sport that you go out and play with your friends, and will gain the same benefits and decrease your stress just as much as compared to other strategies as well. So I think that this is helpful because it'll allow me to explain a wide range of physical activities. And then this article is interesting because it acknowledges that there's a strong correlation between physical activity and stress. But it points out that not very many colleges require their students to take PE classes. And this kind of plays into the earlier article about some students don't know how to, like the best way to engage in physical activity. So this article is explaining that let me find it right here in the discussion, if we can require more students to take PE classes, we can teach them ways to stay active and ways to gain an overall strong, healthy body. And like I said with the other article, get rid of the nerves, become more comfortable with different types of physical activities, so they're more knowledgeable, they're more prepared, and they're more willing to do it on their own after the class. But this article addresses the fact that not many colleges do this, and it could be a very good intervention program to look into. And then my next article talks about the relationship between your personality and stress. So everyone's personality is different, obviously, and that will play a big role in how you cope with stress, how you really handle the situation when you're stressed. And so that this article explains that right here they explain that there's a bunch of different participants that have different personalities and different lifestyles, and they really compare down here in the results. They compare how different personalities play a role in if people are more willing to engage in physical activity or if they're just not interested in that. They really acknowledge that all of the different risk factors of why people won't engage in physical activity. And then my next article is right here. So this one is my last maybe source, because it talks about the quality of life that college students want to live and the role that stress plays on that. And obviously stress has a negative effect on the quality of life that you can live. But then it goes into explaining how to manage your free time so you can include physical activity, but it never really mentions the correlation between physical activity and stress. You kind of have to imply it yourself, so that's why it's more of a maybe. And then my last article is actually the article that I got my research question from, because this study studied 94 different universities, and they wanted to focus on ways to minimize stress, and they came to the conclusion that physical activity is one of the best ways to do that. And so it interested me, and so that's how I got my research question. So thank you.